What if I told you the bombs falling on Iran right now aren't really meant for Tehran, they're meant for Beijing? On the surface, this looks like another American war in the Middle East. The United States strikes Iran's nuclear facilities. Iran retaliates. Oil prices spike past $100 a barrel. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important shipping lanes on Earth, effectively shuts down, and the world watches. But if you step back and look at the bigger picture, something far more calculated comes into focus. In just 2 months, Washington has taken aggressive action against 2 countries. First, Venezuela, where the U.S. arrested President Maduro and took control of Venezuelan oil fields. Then Iran, where a full-scale aerial campaign destroyed nuclear sites, military infrastructure, and killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Now here's the connection most people are missing. Venezuela and Iran are 2 of China's largest sources of cheap, sanctioned oil. Oil that flows outside the Western financial system. Oil that is often paid for in yuan, not dollars. Oil that fuels China's factories, its data centers, its military machine. Losing both suppliers in the span of weeks is not coincidence. In American policy circles, this is being openly framed as a strike on China's network of autocratic allies. The idea is simple. Beijing has built influence through countries like Russia, Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela. By knocking out those partners one by one, Washington wants to break the chain and strategically isolate China. This war is not just about Iran. It is about the future of American and Chinese power. And tonight, we are going to break down exactly how this is playing out and why it might end up backfiring in ways Washington never expected. If you want to hurt China without firing a single shot at Chinese soil, you go after its energy supply. And that is exactly what is happening right now. China is the world's largest oil importer. Roughly 13% of its crude comes from Iran. Another 17% comes from Russia. Venezuela was another significant supplier. Much of this oil is discounted, sometimes $8 to $10 below market price per barrel. It moves through shadow fleets, transferred between tankers at sea, relabeled with Malaysian or Indonesian flags, handled by small independent refineries in China known as teapot refineries. And critically, much of it is traded in yuan, helping Beijing in its long-term goal of challenging the dominance of the US dollar. This cheap oil doesn't just keep gas prices low in China, it powers the industries that matter most: artificial intelligence infrastructure, semiconductor fabrication, aerospace manufacturing, military production. Nearly half of China's seaborne oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. So when the United States launches strikes against Iran and that strait becomes a war zone, China's energy lifeline comes under immediate pressure. Oil prices climb. Shipping insurance skyrockets. Tanker routes get rerouted. Deliveries are delayed. The cost of doing business with Iran goes up dramatically, even if the oil doesn't stop flowing entirely. This is economic warfare, disguised as a military campaign. But here is the twist that nobody in Washington seems to want to talk about. The energy shock doesn't just hit China, it hits America too, and arguably it hits America harder. The Strait of Hormuz carries roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply. When it closes, or even partially closes, the ripple effects are massive. Global oil crosses $100 a barrel. Inflation rises across the developed world. Fuel prices at American gas stations climb. Transportation costs go up. Manufacturing gets more expensive. Even the price of food increases because of higher delivery costs. Economists are already warning that if oil stays above $100 for any sustained period, U.S. economic growth will slow significantly. And here is the critical difference between now and past conflicts. America is not entering this war from a position of economic strength. Interest rates are high, national debt is at historic levels, structural deficits are growing, credit markets are fragile. The kind of energy-driven inflation this war is creating doesn't just sting, it compounds. It feeds into borrowing costs, consumer spending, and business investment. It creates a drag that could last far longer than the war itself. Throughout American history, wars have had lasting impacts on the national budget. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, trillions of dollars spent, contributing to decades of future debt. This war has all the makings of another fiscal sinkhole, but this time the starting position is far more precarious. So the first paradox appears. America may be trying to squeeze China's energy supply, but in doing so, it is stressing its own economy in ways that could prove deeply counterproductive. And the economic cost is only half the problem, because the real battlefield in the competition with China might not be the Persian Gulf at all. It might be Taiwan. To fight this war in the Middle East, the United States has already begun shifting critical military assets away from the Indo-Pacific. Patriot missile defense systems have been redeployed from South Korea. South Korea's president has publicly acknowledged that his government cannot stop Washington from moving weapons off the peninsula. 2 guided missile destroyers, normally stationed at Yokosuka, Japan, are now supporting operations tied to the Iran war. The only U.S. aircraft carrier forward deployed in Asia is currently in maintenance. This is not a minor logistical shuffle. This is a visible thinning of the margin of deterrence in the Western Pacific. The same weapons systems being used in the Middle East right now are the exact systems America would need in a conflict over Taiwan. SM-3 interceptors, THAAD missile defense batteries, precision-guided munitions, F-35 fighter jets. As of late 2025, the U.S. had roughly 400 SM-3 interceptors and about 500 THAAD interceptors in total inventory. At current rates of use, some analysts warn those stockpiles could be exhausted in a matter of weeks in a high-intensity conflict. Every interceptor fired at an Iranian missile is one less available for the Pacific. Every precision munition dropped on an Iranian target is one that cannot be used to defend Taiwan. And while America depletes these resources in the Gulf, China's military continues to grow. The Chinese Navy now fields over 370 ships and submarines, including more than 140 major surface combatants. It is numerically the largest navy in the world. That does not mean China has surpassed the United States in total military power, but in a contest close to China's home waters, where proximity and industrial depth matter enormously, the balance is already tightening. The issue is not total power, it is simultaneous readiness, and right now, America is being forced to choose. Now here is where the story takes its most dangerous turn, because America's most advanced weapons have a dependency that most people don't know about. They depend on China. Modern missile systems, fighter aircraft, radar arrays, guidance systems, communications equipment, all of them require rare earth minerals and processed critical materials. Permanent magnets made from rare earths are essential to nearly every piece of advanced military hardware the United States operates. And the United States is shockingly dependent on imports for these materials. As of 2024, America was 100% import reliant for 12 critical minerals, 50% or more reliant for another 29. And here is the critical detail. The U.S. remains entirely reliant on imports of rare earth permanent magnets for commercial demand, while domestic production meets only a fraction of defense needs. Who dominates the global supply of these materials? China. During trade tensions, Beijing restricted exports of key minerals. Chinese exports of yttrium products to the United States fell from 333 tons in the 8 months before controls to just 17 tons in the 8 months after. Yttrium is used in thermal barrier coatings that keep jet engines from melting at high temperatures. Without it, engines cannot function. War makes this vulnerability worse because wartime demand changes political priorities. The Pentagon has already asked mining companies for proposals to expand domestic supply of 13 critical minerals. The request came literally 1 day before strikes on Iran began. The timeline tells you everything. This vulnerability is not new. The war simply exposed how close military planning, industrial replenishment, and mineral dependence have become. And here is the cruel irony. If the Pentagon prioritizes military supply of these scarce materials, civilian industries lose access. Semiconductor production slows, aerospace manufacturing becomes more vulnerable. AI infrastructure doesn't collapse overnight, but it becomes slower to build, more expensive to scale, and more exposed to political triage. America is trying to outcompete China in the technologies of the future, but the war it is fighting today could starve those very industries of the materials they need to win. But there is another dimension to this story that most analysts are overlooking, and it might be the most important one of all. This war is also a live demonstration for military planners in Beijing, and what it demonstrates is something China desperately lacks. The United States is not fighting alone. Israel is conducting offensive operations alongside American forces. Gulf states, including the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, are providing bases, early warning systems, missile interception support, and geographic strategic depth. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth called fighting alongside Israel a true force multiplier. That is alliance power in action. Now look at China. Beijing has exactly one formal military ally, North Korea, a highly unpredictable actor whose involvement in any conflict would carry enormous escalatory risks. China has strategic partnerships with Russia, Pakistan, and Iran, but these partnerships are loose. They are not binding mutual defense agreements, and they have proven far less effective than true alliances when real crises arrive. Despite being in a strategic partnership with Iran, China has done almost nothing beyond verbal condemnation since the war began. Some have called Beijing a fair-weather friend. Now project this forward to Taiwan. In a conflict over the Taiwan Strait, the United States would likely fight alongside Japan, Australia, the Philippines, and possibly South Korea. Japan has indicated that a Taiwan contingency could constitute a survival-threatening situation justifying the use of force. The Philippines has said involvement would be inevitable. South Korea hosts 30,000 American troops who could provide intelligence, logistics, and rear area support. China, on the other hand, would likely fight alone. So the Iran war presents a strange paradox. It drains American resources, yes, but it also showcases a capability that China simply does not have: the ability to fight a coalition war. So what exactly is China doing while all of this unfolds? The answer is fascinating and deeply strategic. Almost nothing visible, and that is entirely by design. Beijing has condemned the strikes, called for ceasefire, requested emergency UN Security Council meetings. But notice what China has not done. It has not sent ships, it has not armed Iran, it has not threatened retaliation, it has not even directed its strongest criticism at Trump personally. Why? Because a summit between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump was being planned. A possible breakthrough in the trade war was on the table. Beijing is preserving diplomatic space for that meeting, and that calculation outweighs solidarity with Tehran. On Chinese social media, the dominant reaction is not anger about the war, it's cynicism about Iran. Commentators call Iran's retaliatory strikes theater. They say Iran overestimated its own power and brought this upon itself. At the highest levels of the Chinese government, there is quiet disappointment. The $400 billion strategic partnership China and Iran signed in 2021 has barely been implemented. Tehran blocked Chinese projects out of fear of foreign influence. Beijing's calculus is coldly pragmatic. It does not particularly care who rules Iran. It cares whether the oil keeps flowing. Meanwhile, China is playing the long game. While America spends and depletes, China is investing in semiconductors, artificial intelligence, clean energy, and industrial self-sufficiency. In 2025, renewable sources surpassed oil as China's second-largest energy source after coal. China has been quietly building strategic oil reserves. Even if Iranian oil disappears entirely, Beijing has enough reserves for months and can increase Russian imports to fill the gap. The strategy is simple. Let America exhaust itself in the Middle East, conserve resources, build the industries that will define the next century, and wait. Some in Washington argue that all of this disruption actually gives America leverage over China. The logic goes like this. By disrupting Iranian oil, you raise China's energy costs, you destabilize a supplier Beijing depends on, and that gives you bargaining chips at the negotiating table. Trump even delayed his planned summit with Xi Jinping, officially because of the war. But the timing is telling. Energy markets are tightening. China's growth target has been lowered to its slowest pace since 1991. The message to Beijing is clear. We control the chaos. Come to the table on our terms. But does this leverage actually hold up? China has options: strategic petroleum reserves, Russian crude, expanding renewable capacity, indirect oil channels built over years of sanctions evasion. Even if Iranian supply drops significantly, it is not fatal for an economy that is actively reducing its fossil fuel dependence. For America, the picture is different. A prolonged Middle East war means sustained inflation, political backlash from voters paying more at the pump, industrial strain from mineral shortages, military fatigue from depleted stockpiles. The leverage Washington thinks it has may be real in the short term, but the costs it is paying to maintain that leverage could be structural, permanent, self-inflicted. And there is another problem with the leverage theory. The Trump administration has actually had to ease sanctions on Iranian oil already loaded on tankers, releasing an estimated 140 million barrels to stabilize energy markets. It has also eased some restrictions on Russian oil. These moves widen access to oil that had largely been flowing to China, introducing more competition, but they also undermine the very pressure campaign that was supposed to give America its edge. The leverage is leaking, even as Washington tries to tighten the grip. If any of this feels familiar, it should, because we have seen this movie before. In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq. The war was supposed to be quick. It was supposed to reshape the Middle East. It was supposed to demonstrate American power beyond question. Instead, it lasted years. It cost trillions. It stretched the military to breaking point. It damaged American credibility around the world. And, most importantly for our story tonight, it created a massive strategic vacuum. And who filled that vacuum? China. During the years America was focused on Iraq and Afghanistan, China joined the World Trade Organization, expanded its manufacturing base, built its navy, invested in infrastructure across Asia and Africa, and positioned itself as the world's factory floor. While America fought in deserts, China built chip fabs. Now history is rhyming. The competition with China in the 21st century is not about territory or oil wells. It is about semiconductors, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, clean energy, the industrial alliances needed to make technological ecosystems work. Those races are not won in the Strait of Hormuz. They are won in laboratories, in factories, in trade agreements, in the patient, unglamorous work of building supply chains and training engineers. Every dollar spent on munitions in the Gulf is a dollar not spent on domestic industry. Every month of political attention consumed by the Middle East is a month not focused on the Pacific. Every missile fired at Iran is a missile not available for deterrence against China. The more America gets pulled into the Middle East, the more space it opens for China to advance in the areas that will actually determine who leads the world in 2030 and beyond. So, here is the ultimate question. Is this war weakening China, or is it accelerating America's strategic overreach? On paper, targeting Iran accomplishes several things. It eliminates a Chinese oil supplier. It signals American military strength. It demonstrates the power of U.S. alliances. It tests weapon systems in real combat. But in practice, the costs are mounting in ways that may outweigh every one of those gains. Global inflation is rising, missile stockpiles are depleting, rare earth dependencies are being exposed, Indo-Pacific deterrence is thinning, the national debt is growing, and domestic political pressure is building as Americans pay more for gas, more for food, more for everything. Meanwhile, China watches, China waits, China conserves. China invests in the industries of the future, while America spends on the conflicts of the past. China builds energy independence while America fights over energy choke points. China strengthens its industrial base while America drains its own. The real measure of power in 2026 is not who can strike hardest in the first week of war. It is what an industrial base can produce, what an alliance network can sustain across multiple theaters simultaneously, how many strategic priorities an economy can serve before scarcity forces ugly choices. What left the American air base in South Korea for the Persian Gulf was not just missile defense hardware. It was a reminder that endurance, not merely firepower, is the decisive variable in the next phase of great power competition. Military actions are not necessarily linked with strategic benefits. The initial intention of this war may have been to send a message and demonstrate strength, but the emerging evidence suggests the actual outcome may be far more complicated and potentially counterproductive. Instead of cementing American hegemony, this war may hasten the arrival of a multipolar world, a world where China stands at the center and America is left carrying the long-term burden of an economy strained by a conflict it chose but could not afford. This war is being fought in Iran, but its consequences will be decided in the Pacific, and that is the strategic paradox that will define our era.